Hi, if you've seen my last video, you will know that I've had a rough couple of weeks. I don't really want to get into the details here. If you haven't watched that already and you'd like to know what happened, you can check out my vlog in the cards above. What I do want to talk to you about today is my unhealthy coping strategies. The one that I utilize most these days is buying books. And sure, you could argue that I don't need any more books, and maybe that's not the most healthy way to cope with a tragedy. However, what is also valid is going through a really fucking hard time and doing what you need to do to get through. So I'm about to show you an awful lot of books. It is too many books to buy in 3 weeks, in my opinion. But like I said, I was going through a lot, and the vast majority of these I bought secondhand, so I didn't do too much damage, if you know what I mean. And while I am not a fan of toxic positivity, I am a fan of at least trying to find the silver lining in a dark cloud. So without further ado, let's at least get a good haul video out of my messy 3 weeks, okay? Happily, I have actually already read one of these books, and that was The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. I found this at a secondhand bookshop in Sussex Inlet, I think it was. Great secondhand bookshop, by the way. This is obviously a book that a lot of booktubers that I follow love. I've seen people list this as their favorite book of all time. I do also know that it's quite divisive though, and unfortunately, I fell on the side of not liking this very much at all. I really enjoyed the first 200 pages or so. I liked the setup. I was enjoying the atmospheric, quite beautiful writing. But ultimately for me, it was just too long with not enough payoff. So I ended up quite frustrated by the end. But having said that, given that this is such a well-known and well-beloved book, I'm glad that I read it. I'm also glad that I only paid $5 for it. Now, a book that I literally got for free is Emily Bitto, Wild Abandon. This was at like a book exchange in a shop in Bateman's Bay. And they did say, you know, either swap a book or give us a gold coin to take a book. And I tried to give them a $2 coin, but they said, no, just have the book. And I was like, okay. I have actually read a book by Emily Bitto. I read it in a vlog. It was The Strays, which is her very well acclaimed, I think it won the Stellars or the Miles Freckland Award here in Australia. I really didn't like that book. So an Australian author that I did not like her most acclaimed book, but I've always been curious, you know, like I liked the writing well enough and I often hear wonderful things about Emily Bitto. So I did have in the back of my mind that I would like to try something else from her, but I was not willing to spend $35 on a paperback. I'm not sure exactly when I'm going to get to this, but I don't know. It'll stay on my Australian fiction shelf and I will read it eventually. Another Australian book, this is Mammoth by Flynn. I have not read anything by this author before. I think this was a debut a couple of years ago, and I remember like hearing quite a bit about it and I was interested. It was just a situation where, you know, I would often pick it up at the bookshop, but then, you know, when I had too many books and I had to cull some and only buy 2 or 3 at a time, this was always one that would go back on the shelf. But it has always intrigued me, and seeing it for I think $10 in a secondhand bookshop in Mogo, I could not say no. It says on the back, narrated by a 13,000-year-old extinct mammoth, this is the mostly true story of how a collection of prehistoric creatures came to be on sale at a natural history auction in New York in 2007. With our planet on the brink of calamitous climate change, Mammoth scrutinizes humanity's role in the destruction of the natural world while also offering a message of hope. And Fauvel Perret, an author that I love, says it's funny, warm, and totally unique. Loved it. Also, it's a very graphic, very cool cover. Next, I bought an entire fantasy series, which honestly seems like really bad decision making, but it happened. This is a fantasy series I heard someone was talking about on YouTube as one of the most underrated fantasy series and that they love it. And this is by Lynn Flewelling, book 1, 2, and 3 of the Tamir Triad. I honestly don't know what this is about, other than that I've heard it recommended and that there was all 3 in like a matching set. That's literally it. That's all I have to justify my actions. Now, this is a book that I actually bought new, but it was the cheapest of the lot, other than the free one. It was 70 cents. I didn't know that they sold books for 70 cents, but they do apparently sometimes. I'm not entirely sure if this is a book I'm gonna love, but I'm weak. It was 70 cents. What can I say? This is Royal Exile, the first book in the Valasar trilogy by Fiona McIntosh. And I think Fiona is an Australian author as well. And this is like a fantasy romance. A kingdom besieged, a single hope, a prince on the run. So yeah, honestly not sure what to think of this, but I bought it. Now, a book that I actually already own, but I bought anyway because I found a secondhand copy in hardcover, is To Be Taught If Fortunate. To Be Taught If Fortunate? It doesn't really roll off the tongue, does it? To Be Taught If Fortunate by Becky Chambers. And I don't usually have a big preference of hardcover over paperback, but for novellas, I mean, there's something quite nice about it being a hardback. And when I saw this for $5, I bought it. I haven't read this yet. The only Becky Chambers I've read is A Psalm for the Wild Built, which is one of my favorite books of the year so far. I love it. and I feel like I will love Becky Chambers. So this just feels like an investment into my future collection. Then from another shop in Mogo, I got The Left-Handed Booksellers of London by Garth. This is a book that we stock at work and I've often looked at. I nearly bought it actually before we went to Bateman's Bay as like a book to take along with me, but then I remembered how many books I have and that I didn't need to, and then I did it anyway, but only for $6, so it's not too bad. I've never read anything by Garth before. I don't think that this is the author's like most beloved work, but I mean, it's about booksellers and I'm a bookseller. That's literally all I've got. In this pulse-pounding and laugh-out-loud expedition to the world of magical booksellers, Garth Nix crafts a unique fantasy that blurs the boundaries between reality and mythic legend. And V.E. Schwab says, this is my favourite kind of tale, one where the magic and the real nest together like pages in a book. A delightful read. Then I got a lot of books from Vinnie's. Vinnie's in Bateman's Bay is a great place to get secondhand books. They are all $2. Firstly, I picked up Graceling by Kristen Cashel. This is a YA fantasy title. I think there's a bit of like a readathon going on BookTube at the moment. And this is also another book that we stock at work. It's the first in a fantasy series, a trilogy, I think, and I've heard good things. And for $2, who can say no? Another one we stock at work, although this is the old ugly cover, is Inkheart by Cornelia Funk. This is a middle fiction fantasy book that I've heard incredible things about, but I have never read. And we sell it at work, so I probably should. I think it has something to do with the stories that are read or written, I can't remember, basically coming to life, which is kind of fun. Very cool. Then a pretty new release is Medusa, The Girl Behind the Myth by Jessie, Burton. This is another one that we stock at work and it's like a retelling of Medusa, but with like these incredible illustrations throughout. Then a bit of a classic one, again, I have not read, but we stock at work in the YA section, is The Outsiders by Se Hinton. I've heard this described as potentially like the first YA book, or definitely very influential in the creation of that category. And it's not very long, so we love that. Then I got the first 2 books in the Spiderwick Chronicles, which is again like I think it's a middle fiction. I mean, it looks middle fiction, but Holly Black tends to be a YA author. Anyway, I think it's a middle fiction fantasy series, and these like hardcovers were just so pretty. Like I wanted to have them and read them, hopefully, at some point. And I don't really know what they're about because on the backs, like the blurb is literally like half covered up with bits and pieces. I think that's to emphasize how mysterious it is. I mean, they even have deckled edges. I mean, the publisher went hard for these little middle grade titles, didn't they? Then I also got Poison Study by Maria V. Snyder. Maria V. Snyder is an author that I have read one book from before that I felt like neutral to positive about. It was called Navigating the Stars, and it was the first book in a kind of sci-fi YA series that she's written. This is, I think, the beginning of a more fantasy series, but it is still YA, and this is a book we stock at work. Both a riveting romance and spellbinding fantasy, Poison Study is one of those rare books that will keep readers dreaming long after they've read it. The romance element doesn't excite me because the romance was one of the things that I didn't really like about Navigating the Stars, but this book I think does have stronger reviews than Navigating the Stars, so fingers crossed. Then another well-beloved, well-known author in YA that I've never read is Patrick Ness. And this was another one that I found at Vinnie's for only $2. I think this is a bit of a weird thriller, so definitely not something I would normally gravitate towards, but again, it's $2 and John Green literally said just read it. So that's what I'm gonna do. And then of course I did also buy a few books brand new. I think these all came from the bookshop at Maruya, which is a great little indie bookshop. I always make sure to visit when I'm in the area, and I visited a couple of times over the 3 weeks and came away with 4 books in total. The first is Bookseller at the End of the World by Ruth Shaw. Honestly, it was the title and the cover that did it for me. This is a memoir of a bookseller who owns and runs, I think, 2 little bookshops in New Zealand. And that's literally all I needed to know, along with this cover, to sell me on the book. This will make you weep and make you laugh and make you want to read more books and make you want to visit Ruth and her 2 wee bookshops. Honestly, I already do. I mean, I just think it's such a beautiful book. I love it already. Then a book that I had been like looking at on and off ever since it came out. It is Night Blue by Angela O'Keeffe. This is a book that I was interested in when it first got released, and I've heard absolutely incredible things about it, but I just never got around to picking it up. Kind of like with Mammoth, where I would often like look at it in bookshops. I never actually ended up buying it. And I was doing the exact same thing in Maria. I was looking at it and the bookseller saw me looking at it and she's like, that's an incredible book. You should read it. And I was like, okay, sold. I just needed that little extra push. Potent, haunting, and lyrical, Night Blue is a debut novel like no other. A narrative largely told in the voice of the painting Blue Poles. Moving between New York and Australia with fluid ease, Night Blue is intimate and tender, yet surprisingly dramatic. It is a glorious exploration of how art must never be undervalued. And there's some pretty incredible end pages in there too. Now, I cannot say that I know a whole lot about Jackson Pollock or his art or anything like that, but the idea of a book largely being told from the perspective of a painting, I don't know, like, I'm intrigued. And then certainly one of the newest releases that I picked up is Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. Now, obviously this cover is something that catches your eye in the bookshop, but also this book is at least in part about disability, or it features a disabled character. I'm not really sure. And then I like this. It says, this is not a romance, but it is about love. I haven't heard a lot of people talking about this book yet, so I don't know what that representation is like. Fingers crossed it's good, and I don't know, I'm excited about this one. And then a total impulse purchase literally as I was at the counter, I spotted Sayaka Murata's new book, Life Ceremony. And this is a collection of short stories. I've read some Sayaka Murata's other 2 books that are published in English, Earthlings and The Convenience Store Woman. I liked Convenience Store Woman. I won't go so far as to say I loved it, but I did really like it. And Earthlings, I still don't know what the fuck to think about that book. It is the weirdest book I've ever read. Well, certainly up there anyway. Even though I still don't really know if I loved Earthlings or hated it, I like the complexity of it. And I do enjoy it's one of those books that I still think about, even though it's been like more than a year since I read it. And so even though right now I definitely am looking for more cozy stuff, I feel like there will always be a place on my shelf for the weird and the wacky. And I feel like Sayaka Murata perfectly fits that category for me. So those are the 20 or so books that I bought in the 3 weeks that I spent in Bateman's Bay. Nothing opens your wallet faster than trauma, what can I say? Anyway, a haul is always a bit of fun, so I hope you enjoyed this silver lining out of my rather traumatic 3 weeks. Not sure when I'm gonna get to all 20 something of these books, because obviously I have a lot of other books to get to too, but I mean, I think there's some interesting gems in here, and it's always nice to find a bargain too. But thank you so much for watching, especially if you made it all the way to the end, and a big thank you to my wonderful patrons over on Patreon, and especially big thank you goes to Livia, Lynette Brown, and Marie for their very generous support. Let me know in the comments which of these books that you think I should read next, and until next time, happy reading. Bye! Oh my god. I swear to god, filming thumbnails is a health and safety hazard.